Hey everybody, just going to do a little how-to video here. I'm down here in the swamp, and today we're working on a 2001 Hyundai Elantra 4-cylinder 2.0 liter. It's also called the beta engine. Now I started to do this video earlier and I had some camera problems and lost part of it, so I'm kind of having to jump in the middle of this, but I'm just going to run you through the steps leading up to where we're at now. It's quite easy to do this. Of course, like I said, I may not have mentioned, but what this is as in the title, this is going to be a timing belt service. These are spec'd to be replaced over 60,000 miles. This vehicle currently has 143,000 miles on it and no records of timing belt service to know when the last one was done. So the timing belt still looks, I have the cover off here and the timing belt still looks good, but you don't need to push that because this is an interference engine, and if the timing belt does break teeth off of it or break completely, you'll have to pull the head off to fix it because you'll have bent valves, and that's just a nightmare. You just don't want to risk that. That's an expensive repair. You know, you're talking about $1,000 to fix the head on it, to remove and replace the head and the valves and everything else, as opposed to, you know, $150 for this timing belt job. So let me just bring you up to speed what you need to do to get to this point. First thing you're going to do, you'll see I've got the vehicle jacked up. There's a jack sitting under it right here under the frame. I got it up high enough to get the right front wheel off the car. You have to take the right front wheel off. I suggest either making sure you have a strong jack or preferably put on jack stands to do this. Also, second step is going to be, once you get the car up and where you need it to be and have the wheel off, is you'll want to use another jack and a small piece of wood up under the oil pan of the engine. The purpose of that is to raise the engine, keep the engine supported, because you'll be taking the motor mount off during this process, and you don't want the engine to fall, you know, downward. Okay, when you come back up and you have your jacks in place, you have the wheel off and all that, next thing, of course, you don't see it here, I've already removed it, but there's an acoustic cover that goes on this engine, large cover, and there's 4 bolts to hold it on. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You 2mm bolts, remove them. Just keep them with the cover, put it in a good safe place. I always put mine in the trunk of the car, keep everything together. Okay, next thing, after you get that acoustic cover off, it's optional at that point. You can remove 3 bolts that hold this small black plastic cover on the end of the valve cover to access the top of the timing belt. That's optional, but you can do it now if you want to, but it does need to come off. It just, once you get those loose and removed, cover just slips up and off. Okay, next thing you'll need to do is, after you have those covers off, you'll need to concentrate on removing the 3 accessory drive belts. You have power steering up at the top, alternator down low on the front, and at the back you have an air conditioning compressor. They each have a belt running, and they don't have a serpentine belt on this model. So the first and the easiest to get to is going to be the power steering pump, although it is not the first accessory belt to come off. There's a reason for doing this in this order, and I'll tell you that just in a second. This is a very simple procedure. Now, I already have this one off and tied up out of the way. There's only 2 bolts on this power steering pump. There's the one at the bottom just keeps it tight. The one at the top also tightens it, but it's in a slot. You can see right there, that's the slot. You loosen these both up and you can push the power steering pump in. But what I do is I just go ahead and take the bolts all the way out and make sure you keep them somewhere so you know which is which. And then pull this pump out and away. You know, just over to the side like this is, because you want it out of the way. And I just screwed the bolts back in. You can see here and here. I just put my bolts back in. Once you have that out of the way, that belt, you can just kind of let it lay over to the side a little bit, because it won't come off, because the alternator belt is the outermost belt on here, this way into the engine, so it has to come off first. The alternator, and let me interject this, before you do any of this with the alternator, you make sure this battery is connected, because I have to do something with the starter motor to turn the engine. But be sure that you disconnect this battery before you start fooling with this alternator, because it's got a lot of connections on it back there at the back, and you just don't want to try to risk shorting it out with a wrench. But the alternator, to loosen it, is very simple. You have one at the bottom, access from the bottom of the car. On the bottom of the alternator, you have a 12mm nut that needs to be loosened about halfway. Not removed, just loosen it. And then come back up to the top, and you'll see this. You can see it in there or not. You see there's a long bolt front to rear, and then there's another bolt here. I think that's a 14. What you do first, you remove this bolt here about halfway out. Back it out about half its length. Get it nice and loose. Loosen this one up the same way, counterclockwise. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Just get all nice and loose. And when you do that, this alternator, you can then push it in towards the engine, rotate it in. You may have to use a little bit of force on it, but it'll go as long as you have these fasteners loosened like I told you. And then just get that belt off. You just work it off the pulleys and then pull it out. I already have mine all the way off over there. Once you do that, you can go ahead and also remove the power steering belt and lay it to the side. And you will then need to concentrate on removing the air conditioning belt. Now also, when you're into this cover, let me add this. There's also another bracket sort of like this. It's back here. It's held on by these small bolts that hold that plastic cover on. Just keep it with them, but it'll get it out of the way. And so yeah, you do that. And anyway, the next thing you'll need to do is deal with this air conditioning belt. And the way you do that, let me get my light here, is you go under here, and once you get under here, I have it off already. I'm sorry that I had to kind of jump in the middle of this because of me erasing my video, but when you're looking at this, there's a cover here, there's a shield that's held on in this area with two 10mm bolts. You just remove those two bolts and pull the shield down and keep it wherever you're keeping the rest of your parts and stuff. And this lets you get access to, well, first of all, the air conditioning setup. Now you see this here, this thing at the rear of the engine, that's the tensioner wheel for the air conditioner belt. And peeking out back there is another one of those long adjusting bolts. That's what you use to adjust the tension of the belts. But as in the alternator, you have to loosen this. This is the one that keeps the whole shebang from moving back and forth. You just loosen this nut up on this wheel. You don't have to take it all the way out. Just loosen about halfway, and then you can start unscrewing this thing counterclockwise. That big long bolt, and that'll let the tension off of it. You can just move it with your hand, and then you can remove the belt. The compressor itself does not move on this. Don't even try to take bolts out of the air conditioning compressor. It doesn't move. It's bolted directly to the engine. The way to get the belt off is just like I said. Just loosen this tensioner wheel and rotate it just away from the belt. Okay, do a part 2 here. Just a second. See you there. Okay, and we're back. Part 2 is now. I've led you up to the point where I'm at now on this, and what we're going to deal with here is, you'll see I have my crankshaft, harmonic balancer, crankshaft pulley in view. I have a large socket and socket driver and a breaker bar type of deal. I use a jack handle, but it's the same purpose. You see it's down here against the floor of the shop. And what we're going to do is this bolt that's holding this wheel has to come off to get to the bottom of the timing belt to access it. It has to. You can't do it otherwise. So you just have to remove that one bolt, and it's in there tight. So what we're going to do is, we've hooked, like I told you in the last video, we'll hook the battery back up, and we're going to use the starter to just bump it over and to break that bolt loose. Because if you got an impact wrench, now you can try an impact, but then you still got to be sure that keep the engine from turning. However you can do that. So this is just kind of the quick and dirty method. Now when I say bump the starter over, I mean bump it. I mean bump the key like I'll show you. You just hit the key and let off of it. You're not trying to start the engine. You don't sit there and it should just take just a good hit with the starter, and that thing should come loose. So we're going to do that now and see what we got. I also want to add, notice I've put a new terminal on this cable end here. The old one was just in terrible shape, rotted and broken and everything. So, okay, we've got all the belts off, we've got everything out of the way. Like I said, the engine should not try to, I need to go the other way, so start if you're quick enough. If it does, just turn it back off, because you're not going to hurt anything anyway. If anything, it'll just spin that bolt out. Some folks like to take the fuel pump fuse out and things like that, but I'm gonna play with that. Now, this is a manual transmission car. You need to either have your foot on the clutch and it in neutral or in park. Okay. And we're just gonna bump the starter. Okay. Alright, now we're going to pull our battery cable back off. Okay, now we'll check and see if this is loosened up or not. I'll be back at you in just a minute. Okay, we're back. Now, this worked exactly as I predicted. There's the bolt just easily spinning out by hand. There it is. Okay, now then. Now I'm not sure on this one. I think this should just slip off. I see it's got some, looks like if you see that, it is going to. Somebody was smart, they put anti-seize on these threads. See that gray stuff here? That's anti-seize. It's a very smart idea. Okay, pull these off. Now, show you something else here. This has a locating key up there. So, when you go to put this back on, you see that slot, you make sure you put it back on the right way. Don't try to force it on the wrong way. Alright. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, you had to use a starter to get that thing off. How are you going to get that tight, back that tight? Well, that's a good question. Really what you're going to have to do at that point is, I think what I'm going to have to do, I probably suggest doing, is we'll have to probably going to have to put the car in gear and get the wheels back on it. We may do this kind of as a last step where possible, because I'll have to be sure, I'll have to just pretty much have to stand on this bar to get it tightened up, because it's pretty tight. So as I get into that, and decide my choice, what I'll do, I'll film that and let you know. And for right now, we're gonna have to remove this. This is the bottom cover, as you can see. Sorry about the lighting. Let me try to fix that. This is the bottom cover. Looks like it's got some 10mm bolts in it. And let me get that off and we'll look at what we got in there. Okay folks, unfortunately to get this bottom cover off this water pump pulley here is going to have to come off. It's got 4 bolts on it. Hold it on. Just 10mm bolts. You'll need to use vice grips or something on the bottom to hold it from turning. But it has to come off, unfortunately. Okay, 2 pulleys are off. Now there's one in the back and one on the front here. Be sure you keep them in the right order so you know how they go back on. Also notice they also are keyed. That little slot cut in them, so be sure that's on right when you put them back. Now something I forgot to mention here. You need to go ahead and remove this motor mount since you have the engine jacked up right here to get into everything. I forgot to mention that. I'm going to put this in the description first, so everybody knows to go ahead and do that. But it's just there's 3 14mm fasteners and 1 17 over here. But like I said, when you jack this engine up, don't crank the whole car up with the jack. It's not what you're trying to do. You just just barely start to lift the engine up with the jack on the oil pan and that piece of wood in there. That way everything won't be in a bind. So now I got that pulley, and there's also a little dust shield there. That needs to come off. That was behind that pulley right there. It was not in front of it. It's between it and the crankshaft. Let me see if I can get this out. Yeah. Let's go up here and see what's up. I have a bolt still in it. That's like what that is there. No, it's just wanting to be fussy, I guess, unless I've missed a bolt somewhere. Yep, I did. It's rolling right. See my finger? It's right under there. Now also, well, this camera's getting low. Also, now people say you always change the water pump. Always change the water pump. That's good to do that if you want to, but I'm not on this one because this is not one of those engines where the well, I'll get that and then I'll start the video back up, but I'll just go ahead and finish what I was going to say here. This is not one of those that runs the water pump off the timing belt, which I think is an utterly stupid design. Because, in fact, I think timing belts in general are a dumb design. It's just all it is a cost-saving measure. Car companies said, oh, well, it makes it run quieter, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, maybe it does, but I'll put up with some noise for not having to change this dang thing, you know, every 60, 70, 80,000 miles. And, you know, and then on top of that, if somebody doesn't change it, and it breaks and it ruins the whole top end of the engine. I mean, that's crazy. I don't know why car manufacturers ever thought that was a good idea. So, luckily, nowadays they're getting away from these timing belts. Everything's going back to timing chains. So that just proves that timing chains could have been used the whole time. They just didn't want to. But anywho, we're stuck with timing belts if you have a car like this. So, and you got to change them. But anyway, I'm not going to do that water pump this time. These don't get as much load on them, on the bearings, as ones that have like a fan mounted on, like the older cars and stuff. So this one feels good, and it wasn't making any noise, you know. If you got one that's making a noise, like if something up here is going when it's running, something's going or like going that's something. That's either a water pump going bad, or it's one of the tensioners maybe on this timing belt's going bad. So you need to look into it for sure. You don't ignore some kind of a noise up here, like in this end of the engine. That could be fatal. So Alright, well let me work back on getting this cover off here, and I'm going to put my put my camera on the charger for a little bit too. I'll be right back at you.